Night Bus Hero by Anjali Hero.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Jarvis, teacher of food and nutrition. I will be reading you chapter 10 of The Night Bus Hero, A Tale of Three Lives. Apologise? Asked the old man, sounding confused. He was holding out a hand for me to shake, but he smelled bad and I was sure his hands were super dirty, so I gave him a wave instead. No worries, he said. Don't have to shake if you don't want to. Then slowly, the old man's eyes began to get wider and wider. Hold on, he said. You're the boy, the one who pushed my trolley into the lake. He's come to say sorry, explained Maylie, reaching out to touch the sleeve of the old man's coat. Yeah, I'm sorry, I said, trying to look how I imagined being sorry looked. And it was an accident, I added truthfully. An accident, shouted the old man, his whole face becoming blotchy and as purple as beetroot. You mean to tell me I didn't see you go up to my bench, grab the handles of my trolley and run off down the hill with it until it crashed into the lake? No, I mean, yes, I pushed the trolley away from the bench, I said. I just wanted to hide it in the trees, but then I kind of lost control of it. So apparently he didn't mean to push it in the lake, clarified Maylie, like a judge in the courtroom. Thomas shook his head and stroked his beard angrily. Well, I don't believe him. I've seen him around and I've seen what he does to the other kids. He's a bully, a lost cause, and worse than that, he's a bully who thinks it will make him look good to go messing around with homeless guys' most precious possessions. He took a step closer. Isn't that right, boy? Aren't you just a plain old bully? I glared back at the old man. My legs began to tremble and my ears felt like they were going to pop right off like two rocket launchers. Yeah, well, at least I'm not a thief, I screamed. What did you say, boy? Asked the old man, as Maylie stared at me in confusion. You heard me, I shouted. I saw you on Saturday night next to the fountain in Piccadilly Circus, and now I've found you. I'm going to the police and tell them it was you. You're the thief everyone's looking for. The old man gazed down at me with a blank face, and then, turning to Maylie, asked, Is he off his rocker? I'm not off anything. I saw you in the exact same coat and with your beard and everything, I shouted. You even had your hat on. My hat? Asked the old man, pulling the hat off his head and looking down at it. I frowned because something was different. His hair looked much darker than it had been on Saturday night. But then I realised it must have looked lighter because of all the lights from the screens. Yeah, you were wearing that exact same hat. Probably another thing you stole, I added, along with all those priceless statues. The old man looked at Maylie again, and then at me, and then at his tent, and finally started to laugh. Oh, Lord, that's a good one. Me, the statue thief? He actually thinks that I'm the statue thief? Falling quiet, he suddenly grabbed me by the arms. Boy, he whispered, bringing his face so close to mine that I had to turn away from the smell. You think that if I had stolen a load of plonking big statues that I'd be living like this? He turned around so that I could see his sleeping bag and his tent, which I now noticed had holes all over it. This is my home, and this is where I was on Saturday night, not near any blasted fountains. I wanted to move away, but his grip on my arms was too strong. Here, he said, standing back up straight and taking something small and square and brown out of his pocket. He tossed it to me, but I missed and it fell on the floor in front of my feet. Go on, take a look and see the 2 reasons I'd never steal anything. Maylie watched me with narrowed eyes as I picked up the object from the floor. It was a wallet, just like the one my dad had, except instead of being filled with money and credit cards, it was stuffed with pieces of paper and newspaper cuttings. As I held it up, the wallet fell open. On one side was a clear plastic window that showed a faded piece of pink card, half burnt on the bottom. On the bit that wasn't burnt was a photo of Thomas that must have been taken about 100 years ago, when he had lots of curly hair on his head and his face had been clean shaven. Above the photo were the words, UK driving licence, Chilvers, Thomas Benjamin, Doctor, 1st of the 1st, 1976, United Kingdom. Opposite it, underneath another cracked bit of clear plastic, was an old photo that looked as if it had been folded and unfolded at least 1,000 times. It showed a woman with short red hair kissing a baby's bald head. The baby was laughing at the camera with both its hands in its mouth. "Who are they?" I asked, pointing to the woman and the baby. "My 2 reasons. I would rather live on the streets and have them be proud of me than ever live the life of a thief," said Thomas. Snatching the wallet out of my hand, he gently put it back in the pocket on the inside of his coat. "Maylie, get him out of here," he said, turning from me and waving us away, "and don't ever bring him back. I don't want little snots like him making fun of me and throwing my things around, and then coming here and insulting me to my face." "Sorry, Thomas," Maylie said softly. "I thought you really wanted to apologise." Grabbing me by the sleeve, she ordered, "Come on!" Before pulling me away, she stopped and took something wrapped in tinfoil out of her rucksack. "Dad sent you your favourite," she said to Thomas, putting it on the top of the sleeping bag. "Chocolate spread and banana." The old man gave her a nod, still not looking at me. As we hurried back out of the trees and towards the lake, Maylie said, "So I guess you never wanted to say sorry to him at all, did you?" "Yes, I did," I said, stopping in the middle of the path in front of her. "No," said Maylie, shaking her head. "You just wanted to accuse him of being the statue thief." "Well, I did see him there," I argued, "and I think we should tell the police." But Maylie didn't let me get any further. "Don't even think about it. I know Thomas, and I know he would never, ever steal anything. So you just leave him alone, and leave me and everyone else alone too." Pushing me away with both of her hands, she stormed off up the hill. "But wait, who was that woman and the baby in the photo? And why was he so mad about losing his stupid trolley?" Maylie ground to a halt. Slowly, she turned round, breathing so hard through her nostrils that I wouldn't have been surprised if flames had come out of them, and marched right up to me. "That photo is of Thomas's wife and his baby daughter," she said, shouting at me as if I wasn't standing right here in front of her. "They died in a car crash years and years ago. Thomas was driving the car." "Is that why he became, I asked. "You mean homeless?" asked Maylie, not yelling now, but somehow sounding even angrier. "It's not a dirty word, I wanted to tell her that the word might not be dirty, but Thomas definitely was. But I knew she wouldn't answer any more questions if I did. "So, why did he become homeless then?" I asked. "Because sometimes people can't take the sadness. Not when someone they love dies. They get too sad." Calming down, Maylie sighed. "At least that's what happened. That's what my dad says. And that's what happened to Thomas. He felt so sad and alone, and there was no one to help him. So he got so sad that he lost his job, and then he lost his house. And then he was sleeping in a car, but he lost that too. So he had to start sleeping on the streets." "Oh," I said, feeling my nose begin to run for no reason. I wiped it with the back of my sleeve. "That's why he lives in this park and loves that bench," carried on Maylie. "That was where his wife liked to sit. Satisfied?" I shrugged. "And as for your last question, that trolley was full of newspapers. Thomas collects from all the dustbins in the park. He takes them to the recycling centre and they give him some money. That's how he makes enough to buy food every day. But it has also had something else." "What?" I asked. "The plastic bags?" Maylie shook her head. "No, not just the plastic bags. There was a photo album right at the bottom of the trolley. It was full of pictures of his wife and daughter, and now he won't ever get them back because of you." I looked over Maylie's shoulder to the lake and felt my nose run so heavily that I needed both my sleeves to dry it. There was a long silence. "Don't go near him again," said Maylie finally, looking down at the floor instead of me. "He doesn't deserve anyone who's not going to be nice to him. I should never have taken you to see him, because you're not just a bully, you're a liar too." And with that, Maylie walks away, her head high, leaving me standing alone, staring at Thomas's old bench.
My name's Mrs. Mansfield. I'm a teacher of English. This is chapter 11 of The Night Bus Hero by Anjali Rofe. The Thin Blue Line. The next morning I avoided the park on my way to the school. I didn't want to think any more about Miley or Thomas or the questions that had kept popping into my head all night. I arrived early and waited for Will at our usual wall, scowling at anyone who dared to look at me until he joined me. "Hey, did you hear what happened last night?" asked Katie, suddenly appearing from the crowds and running up to us. Me and Will looked at each other in surprise. "How come you're so early?" Will asked. Katie shrugged. "My brother gave me a lift." We didn't say anything. Katie hated anyone making a fuss, even when our half-brother, who lived in another country, had come home and given her a lift to school for the first time in years. "Anyway, did you hear?" asked Katie again. "The thief stole Tinkerbell. I just heard on the news in the car." "Tinkerbell?" asked Will, looking at Katie as if she'd gone mad. "Yeah, you know, from Peter Pan," said Katie. "There was a tiny golden statue of her outside that famous children's hospital, Great Osmond Street or something, and the yellow marks were left everywhere again." "If I was the thief, I would have just taken the vending machines," said Will. "Why?" asked Katie. Will shrugged. "Sweets and crisps and stuff are loads better than some weird fairy statue." "Did they get any pictures of the thief on CCTV or anything?" I asked. Katie shook her head. "No, nothing again, but the head of the police was on the radio and he said they were going to start rounding up homeless people for questioning. That means they suspect them because of the yellow signs. And then Mayor Bainbridge came on and said he was going to help all criminals off the street by making a new law." "Hey, Will, how would you steal a vending machine anyway?" She narrowed her eyes. "And who's that new boy?" I wanted to ask Katie what else she'd heard on the radio, but I couldn't tell she wasn't really listening anymore. She was too busy staring at a boy with a shiny new rucksack and imagining how much pocket money he was going to give us. I followed Katie and Will as they both ran after him, but all through class and even at lunch I smashed trays into people's chests and took sweets and money from kids as usual, I was feeling strange. No matter how much I didn't want to think about them, Thomas and the pictures in his wallet kept popping back up in my mind like a jack-in-the-box. My last break, I was feeling so strange that I let Randy go before we'd even had a chance to pay us. That was when I realised something was seriously wrong with me. "Are you ill?" asked Will as we watched Randy running away from us with a look of happy shock on his face. "Yeah, I think so," I said. My inside felt like fruit getting mashed up in a blender. "Ugh, well, don't give it to us," said Katie, covering her mouth and taking a step back from me. "Don't worry, I won't," I said, suddenly wishing I could make her and Will disappear. "It's that Miley, isn't it?" asked Katie. "She's making you ill. She keeps staring at you weirdly in class." I was just about to tell her that she was wrong when the bell began to ring. But as we walked back to class and sat at our tables, I spotted Miley staring at me with a funny look on her face, just like Katie had said. She quickly looked away when she saw I'd noticed. I waited her to look back at me again so I could silently tell her to leave me alone, when Mrs. Vergara shouted, "Right, class, listen up. Instead of our reading time today, I've got some special guests coming in to talk about a rather big issue facing our city at the moment, and that's the issue of crime." Instantly, a whole classroom of eyeballs swiveled over to me and Katie. I narrowed my eyes and gave everyone a death stare. "As you all heard, London is currently unfortunately being vandalised by a thief, or a gang of thieves, who are going around stealing very precious objects that belong to the public," said Mrs. Vergara. "The invisible thief!" cried out Nelson from behind me. "Well, yes, That's one name for him. Or her, smiled Mrs. Vergara, amongst others. But we all know that no one can ever be invisible, don't we? Nelson nodded, but looked disappointed at the news. Now, the Mayor of London and the police are trying their best to catch this thief and would like to teach us how to become more vigilant. She went to the classroom door and opened it, and 2 police officers walked in. Everyone immediately sat up straight and tried to look as if they had never done a single bad thing in the whole of their lives. Officers? All yours, said Mrs. Vergara, nodding at them as they went and stood by the whiteboard. After Officers Philip and Miriam had wasted everyone's time trying to be cool and funny, they finally started to talk about the one thing we all wanted to know about, the invisible thief. Except they didn't really tell us anything. All they said were things like, any kind of crime needs to be tackled by all of us as a community, and theft of any property would not be tolerated by the police, and your city is our city, so it's up to all of us to protect it. After a while, I stopped listening until I heard Officer Miriam say, so there you have it. She was pointing to what she had written on the whiteboard. If you see anything strange, just remember, Pop-Tarts. Person, object, place, time, alarm, report, truth and safety. Okay, now who would like to ask us a question? Nearly everyone's hands shot up into the air like arrows being fired straight into the sky. How come you haven't caught the thief yet? Can anyone really make themselves invisible? Why are all the signs in yellow? Are you going to arrest anyone who's homeless? If the thief's homeless, where's he putting all the stolen stuff? How much is Paddington Bear worth? After telling us that no one could become invisible and that homeless people weren't going to be arrested just for being homeless and that they had no idea how much Paddington Bear was worth, Officer Philip turned to Rajesh, who was making squeaky noises and reaching up so high he looked like he was trying to dislocate his own arm. Yes, son, what's your question? Rajesh dropped his arm on the table with a thump and asked, the big issue sellers needed for questioning too? Because there are 3 of them out next to my mum's office. I found Rajesh saying big issue in his snotty voice funny, so I muttered out loud, more like big tissue sellers, which made Katie and Will and someone else behind me start to giggle. Officer Miriam frowned at me, and I looked down quickly at my hands and pretended not to see her. You think this is funny, son? Asked Officer Philip. I could tell he was staring at me too, even though I couldn't see him. Instantly, the whole class fell quiet to see what I would do next. Not your son, I said to the table. From somewhere in front of me, I heard Mrs. Vergara sigh loudly. What's your name? Officer Philip took a few steps forward and stopped in front of my desk. Rajesh gave another squeak and tried to move as far away from me as possible. I looked up at Officer Philip's big light bulb-shaped nose and replied, Hector. Hector what? Asked Officer Philip. No, Hector Landis, I replied, making myself want to laugh. Got ourselves a clever clogs here, said Officer Philip, shaking his head. Someone who thinks it's smart to cross the thin blue line. Yeah, well, I'm smarter than you, I replied before I could stop myself. Everyone gasped, and somebody at the back of the class whispered, Ooh. Folding his arms, Officer Philip tilted his head to the side. How do you figure that then, young man? He asked. I glanced around the room. Not a single person seemed to be breathing, and even Mrs. Vergara's fringe looked like it was leaning forwards to see what I was going to say next. I could see Mylene narrowing her eyes at me, as if she was trying to warn me to keep quiet. But I knew I was right. I had the answer, and she didn't, and neither did the police. She had been too stupid to see Thomas for what he really was. Well, now she was going to know the truth. Everyone was. I wasn't going to just cross the thin blue line, whatever that was. I was going to jump right over it and pay Thomas and Miley back. I'm smarter than you because I know who the invisible thief is, I said, folding my arms right back at him. I've seen him, and I know how he turns all the lights and cameras off too. I saw him do it. No way. He can't have. It's a lie. He never. What an idiot. Officer Miriam stepped forward through all the whispers. Did you see something, Hector? She asked. Hector? Warned Mrs. Vergara. This is no time to lie. I'm not a liar, I cried out, sitting up straighter in my chair. I was there on Saturday at Piccadilly Circus skateboarding and I saw him, but he didn't see me. Ask Will, I added, pointing to Will. We took the bus into the city and then I stayed behind on my own, and that's when I saw the thief take the bow thing from the statue on the fountain. Everyone turned to look at Will, who instantly turned a bright shade of green grape. We went there. He stuttered, nodding. The two officers frowned at him and then looked at each other. When they had finished, they turned to Mrs. Vergara. Mrs. Vergara, if you don't mind, we'll take this young man out into the hall to ask him a few questions. Of course, Mrs. Vergara said. Hector? She added, making my name into one long sigh. Off you go. I stood up slowly and screeched my chair extra hard as I tucked it under the desk. I could tell the whole class thought I was messing around, but I wasn't. As I followed the officers out of the room, I grinned extra wide, especially at Miley's shocked face, ready to prove just how much smarter than everyone else I really was.
My name is Mrs. Longman and I am a French teacher here at the Marsh Academy, and I will be reading for you Chapter 12, Hercules and the Toilets. By the time the final bell for home time rang, every teacher and every kid in every year knew I had been taken out of class by the police. I could have easily told them all exactly what I had said to the police, but I knew it would be a lot more fun to keep it a secret. Secrets give you power, just as long as you don't give them away too soon. Mrs. Vergara and Mr. Lancaster and some of the older kids were already looking at me different, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as I could. So, come on, what did you see? Asked Will, catching up with me as I rushed out of the playground. Behind us, kids from the lower years, who were usually too frightened to come close to me, were hurrying after us, trying to eavesdrop. And why didn't you tell us? Added Katie, clutching her rucksack straps as she jogged up to us. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, I promised, as I broke out into a run. I needed to get to the park as soon as I could to see if the police had listened to me and had gone to arrest Thomas. Wait, shouted Katie. Why can't you tell us now? Got to get home, I yelled back. I'll tell you tomorrow. Ignoring the stares from everyone standing outside the McEwen shop and the deep frown that Mr. McEwen was giving me, I sprinted at top speed across the big road and into the park. I looked around, expecting to see bright yellow police tape and vans with flashing lights and officers crawling across the park like a billion black ants. But things in the park were as boring and as normal as always. People were walking children home from school and pushing prams and playing with their dogs and jogging like puffing machines. There wasn't a single police officer or a van anywhere. Hey, shouted a breathless voice from behind me. I turned round. It was Mei Li. She had obviously run all the way from school because her face looked like someone had thrown a wet towel at it. What did you say to the police? She demanded, gripping her stomach. You didn't tell them it was Thomas, did you? I gave her a scowl. What's it to you if I did or didn't? Mei Li shook her head. You're so stupid. You know it wasn't him. He was lying, I argued back. I know what I saw. Mei Li clutched her sides even tighter, just like I did whenever we had to run too many circles in PE. Then, without saying another word, she bolted off towards the lake. Realizing what she was planning on doing, I raced after her, both of us reaching the army of oak trees at the exact same time. Thomas was there, in the very same place we had left him yesterday, sitting outside his tent and reading a book that was nearly as old and brown as him. Thomas, cried Mei Li, as we both ran up to him. He looked up at us, his bushy eyebrows separating like two hairy caterpillars crawling away from each other. Hello, he said, with a smile, followed by a frown. The smile was for Mei Li. The frown and the soft growling sound that came with it was for me. Everything okay? Maylie shook her head and pointed at me. He's told the police that you're the invisible thief, and they're going to come after you and arrest you and make you go to jail. So you have to get away from here. What? Asked Thomas, dropping his book. 3 more long creases appeared on his forehead. Why would you do that? Because I told you I saw you, I said, feeling triumphant. You were lying down in a doorway, and I was at the bus stop opposite. You didn't see me, but I saw you. I saw everything you did. You held up some remote control thing to turn off all the lights, and then you climbed the fountain and sawed off the statue. I've already told you that wasn't me. Wait, you really saw one of the robberies? Asked the old man, his eyes widening so much that they made the bags under his eyes half disappear. You saw the thief? Yes, I saw you, I repeated. Look, you little menace, said Thomas, getting to his feet and hurriedly packing everything into a huge black rucksack that was almost as tall as I was. I don't know who you saw, but it wasn't me, and it wasn't anyone who's ever been homeless. None of us who've lived on the streets would spray our code around the way this thief is doing. And you're more stupid than I took you for if you think any of us have the tools to steal a banana from a fruit farm, let alone public pieces of art. Stopping his packing for a moment, the old man looked at me from my shoes to my eyes and added, But then again, maybe you are more stupid than you look. You're just mad because I figured it out, I shouted. Hoisting his bag onto his shoulder, the old man looked down at me and whispered, You figured out wrong, boy. I'm so sorry, Thomas, said Maylie, who was looking as if she was about to cry. It's all my fault. I should never have brought him here. Oh, not to worry, my girl, said the old man, as he tapped her gently on the cheek. Should think I'd be used to it by now. Anything that goes wrong anywhere, somehow, it's got to be our fault. You tell your dad to let everyone know there's a spot going for a while, he added, nodding at the tent. Wait, I said, trying to think of some way of keeping him in the park. If he left and the police couldn't find him, no one would know it was me who had caught him. The police are already on their way. If you run now, it'll just make things worse for you. I'll take my chances, thanks, replied Thomas, as he tucked his wallet safely away in his coat. You tell your mates in the police good luck for me, and in the meantime, I'd advise you to get your eyes tested. As he walked away, Maylie gave me a look which told me that as much as she had hated me before, she hated me 1,000,000 times more now. But I wasn't ready for when she stepped forwards and, with a loud grunt that sounded like a scream cut short, pushed me to the ground. I stared up at her, too shocked to say anything, and before I could get back up, she had run out of the trees and vanished into the same blinding tunnel of sunlight the old man had walked into. I got up and hurried out of the trees to follow them, but they had both disappeared into the crowds of dogs and people and joggers and cyclists, and I had no idea which way they had gone. The park was too big and had too many exit gates. There was nothing I could do, so I walked home, hating Maylie for ruining everything for me. Hector, is that you? Shrieked my mum as soon as I opened the front door. She was hovering in the corridor like a traffic warden waiting to give someone a parking ticket. I wanted to ask her who else she thought it was going to be, but I could tell right away that wouldn't be a good idea. She looked angry. Helen poked her head out of the living room and watched from a safe distance. Hector, maybe you can tell me why I got a call today, right in the middle of an important meeting, with the news that my son was being interviewed by the police. The police! I stood quietly and waited. If you interrupted Mum when she was shouting at you, it made her go on for longer. I cannot believe that you would come up with a story about seeing a crime and then lie to the police about it. Do you know how serious that is? I didn't, I said, slipping past her and running up the stairs. I didn't lie. You get back here right now, shouted Mum, ignoring what I had just said. She was angry, but not angry enough to follow me up the stairs. You wait until your dad gets home, young man. This is the last straw. I'm sick to the back teeth of having to try and make excuses for you and always worrying about what trouble you'll be getting into next. I slammed my bedroom door shut and chucked my rucksack onto the floor. But straight away, I heard footsteps outside and then a loud, annoying knock. Before I could even answer it, my door swung open, making me wish for the millionth time that I was allowed to have a lock on it. It was Helen, looking redder and spottier than ever. "Go away," I warned. "Did you really tell the police you saw the thief?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "So?" "You do know that you can get locked up in prison for lying to the police, right?" she said, putting her hands on her hips. "It's called obstruction of justice." "I'm not lying," I said, pushing her out of my room and closing the door in her face. "You'll see." "Yeah, well, don't expect me to help you if you are," shouted Helen through the door. "Like you ever would," I shouted back. I could hear her footsteps as she stomped downstairs. My stomach was growling at me, so I pulled out my stash box and, sitting down at my desk, started to munch on an extra large chocolate nut bar and a packet of onion rings. As I switched on my computer and poured the last crumbs of the crisp straight into my mouth, my bedroom door swung open again. I got ready to yell at Helen to get out, but it was only Hercules. He was playing his favourite game of pretending to be jumping on an imaginary pogo stick. For some reason, he had a line of glitter joining up his eyebrows. "Boing, boing, boing," he announced, bouncing in a circle around me. "Huptor, look! This is an extra boing!" And climbing up onto my bed, he began to jump up and down on my pillows. "Stop it," I said, feeling annoyed. "Get down and go away." "Boing, boing, boing," he replied, jumping higher. I stretched out my hand and pushed Hercules away, but I pushed him harder than I meant to, and instead of landing safely on the floor, he fell sideways off the bed and bumped his head against my wardrobe. He turned red and began to cry loudly, sticking his fingers in his mouth, something he only did when he was really hurt. "Shh," I said. "I'm sorry, Hercules. Are you okay?" I rubbed his arms the way Lisa did when he fell. "You pushed me," wailed Hercules, still crying. "I didn't mean to," I said, listening for the sound of Lisa or Mum running up the stairs. "Look," I went on, pulling out my stash box. "You can take anything you want, okay, but you have to stop crying." Sucking on his fingers extra hard for a few seconds, Hercules gulped down his tears as I checked his head. There was a tiny bump rising out of the side of it, like a bread roll. I promised myself that if it went down quickly and I didn't get caught, I wouldn't push Hercules ever again. "Can I have this one?" he asked, looking at me with his watery eyes and pointing to the only remaining caramel-covered chocolate nut bar, something that I would never normally have given him. "Sure," I said, ripping it open for him. Hercules took the chocolate bar and a handful of other sweets, and climbing back up onto my bed, began chomping his way through everything as if nothing had ever happened. I turned to my computer, feeling thankful that Dad had given me the new password for doing such a good job at Mrs. Sanders' house. Even though I hadn't spent more than half an hour with her, all she had wanted was for me to dig up some weeds, which I had done so super fast that even I couldn't believe it. I pulled on my headphones to drown out the sounds of rustling packets and Hercules munching like a hamster, and got ready to find out what the signs the thief had used meant. Dad had said you could only understand them if you knew the secret code, but I was sure the code would be online somewhere. As I clicked on the search bar at the top of the screen, Hercules called out, "Look, Huptor," putting dots of melted chocolates all over his face and nose with his pudgy finger. He explained, "I'm Helen." I gave him a grin and said, "You look just like her. You should go and show her, right now." But he shook his head and, climbing down from the bed, came and stood next to me to make car noises instead. I typed in "homeless thief yellow signs," and we watched together as various images flooded the screen. There were the 3 diagonal lines that I had seen being sprayed on the fountain at Piccadilly Circus, the large circle that had been left at Selfridge's, the sign that looked like the head of a spear that had been sprayed at Paddington Station, and the drawing of a posh hat that had been left at the feet of Peter Pan statue. None of the descriptions under the picture said anything about what they were supposed to mean. As I zoomed out of the image of the Peter Pan statue, Hercules giggled and pointed at my computer, whispering, "Toilet." "Don't be silly," I told him. "That's not a toilet." Hercules pointed at it again, saying, "Yes, it is. I know how to spell it now. Lisa teached me. Toilet." I leant forwards to see what he was pointing at. It was a sign shaped like a white flag hanging on the building next to the Peter Pan Hospital, which said, "Spaces to let," in giant red letters. Above the giant red letters was a symbol of 2 bright blue dragons breathing fire standing on either side of the words, "Lordship London Properties." "It doesn't say toilet," I explained. "It says to let. It's just a sign for people who want to rent a space out. But Hercules had toilets on the brain, and as I scrolled through more pictures about the robberies, he shouted, "Toilets!" at all of them. Then he got bored and ran back downstairs to show Helen the chocolate version of her face. Even after Hercules left and I could concentrate again, I couldn't find any information about what the coded messages meant. So, given up, I switched over to my game and began taking over just as many universes as I could instead.